All right, today I'm going to read Chapter 10 and Chapter 11 of Mr. Popper's Penguins. Chapter 10, Shadows. The next day, the picture of Mr. Popper and Captain Cook appeared in the Stillwater Morning Chronicle. That's a newspaper. With a paragraph about the house painter who had received a penguin by air express from Admiral Drake in the faraway Antarctic. Then the Associated Press picked up the story, and a week later the photograph could be seen in the Sunday edition of the most important newspapers in all of the large cities in the country. Naturally, the Poppers felt very proud and happy. Captain Cook was not happy, however. He had suddenly ceased his gay, exploring little walks around the house and would sit for most of the day, sulking in the refrigerator. Mrs. Popper had removed all the stranger objects, leaving only the marbles and checkers, so that Captain Cook now had a nice, orderly little rookery. "He won't play with us anymore," said Bill. "I tried to get some of my marbles from him, and he tried to bite me." "Naughty Captain Cook," said Janey. "Better leave him alone, children," said Mrs. Popper. "He feels mopey, I guess." But it was soon clear that it was something worse than mopiness that ailed Captain Cook. All day he would sit with his little white circled eyes staring out sadly from the refrigerator. His coat had lost its lovely, glossy look, and his little round stomach grew flatter every day. He would turn away now when Mrs. Popper would offer him some canned shrimps. One evening she took his temperature. It was 104 degrees. "Well, Papa," she said, "I think you had better call a veterinary doctor. I'm afraid Captain Cook is really ill." But when the veterinary doctor came, he only shook his head. He was a very good animal doctor, and though he had never taken care of a penguin before, he knew enough about birds to see at a glance that this one was seriously ill. "I'll leave you some pills. Give him one every hour. Then you could try feeding him on sherbet and wrapping him in ice packs. But I cannot give you any encouragement because I am afraid this is a hopeless case. This kind of bird was never made for this climate, you know. I can see that you have taken good care of him, but an Antarctic penguin can't thrive in still water." That night, the Poppers sat up all night taking turns changing the ice packs. It was no use. In the morning, Mrs. Popper took Captain Cook's temperature again. It had gone up to 105. Everyone was sympathetic. The reporter on the Morning Chronicle stopped in to inquire about the penguin. The neighbors bought all sorts of broths and jellies to try and tempt the little fellow. Even Mrs. Callahan, who had never had a very high opinion of Captain Cook, made a lovely frozen custard for him. Nothing did any good. Captain Cook was too far gone. He slept all day, now in a heavy stupor. Everyone was saying that the inn was not far away. All the Poppers had grown terribly fond of the funny, solemn little chap, and Mr. Popper's heart was frozen with terror. It seemed to him that his life would be very empty if Captain Cook went away. Surely someone would know what to do for a sick penguin. He wished there was some kind of way of asking advice of Admiral Drake, away down at the South Pole, but there was not time. In his despair, Mr. Popper had an idea. A letter had brought him his pet, so he sat down and wrote another letter. It was addressed to Dr. Smith, the curator of the great aquarium in Mammoth City, the largest in the world. Surely if anyone anywhere had any idea what could cure a dying penguin, this man would. 2 days later, there was an answer from the curator. Unfortunately, he wrote, it is not easy to cure a sick penguin. Perhaps you do not know that we too have in our aquarium at Mammoth City a penguin from the Antarctic. It is failing rapidly in spite of everything we have done for it. I wonder later whether it is not suffering from loneliness. Perhaps that is what ails your Captain Cook. I am therefore shipping you under separate cover, our penguin. You may keep her. There's a chance that the birds may get on better together. And that is how Greta came to live at 432 Proudfoot Avenue. Chapter 11, Greta. So Captain Cook did not die after all. There were 2 penguins in the refrigerator, one standing and one sitting on the nest under the ice cubes. They're as like 2 peas, said Mrs. Popper. As 2 penguins, you mean? Answered Mr. Popper. Yes, but which is which? At this moment, the standing penguin jumped out of the icebox, reached inside, and took one of the checkers from under the sitting penguin, whose eyes were closed in sleep, and laid it at Mrs. Popper's feet. Wow, see, Mama? He's thanking me, said Mr. Popper, patting the penguin. At the South Pole, that's the way a penguin shows its friendship, only it uses a stone instead of a checker. This one must be Captain Cook. He is trying to show that he is grateful to us for getting him Greta and saving his life. Yes, but how are we going to tell them apart? It is very confusing. I will go down in the cellar and get some white paint and paint their names on their black backs. And he opened the cellar door and started down, nearly tripping when Captain Cook unexpectedly tobogganed after him. When he came up again, Mr. Popper had a brush and a small paint can in his hands, while the penguin had a white Captain Cook written on his back, C-A-P-T period C-O-O-K. Gook, said Captain Cook, proudly showing his name to the penguin in the icebox. Ah, said the sitting penguin, and then squirming around in her nest, she turned her back to Mr. Popper. So Mr. Popper sat down on the floor in front of the icebox while Captain Cook watched, first with one eye, then with the other. What are you going to call her? Asked Mrs. Popper. Greta. It's a nice name. Oh, and she seems like a nice bird too. But the 2 of them fill the icebox, and pretty soon there will be eggs, and the next thing you know, the icebox won't be big enough for your penguins. Besides, haven't you done a thing about how I'm going to keep the food cold? I will, my love, promised Mr. Popper. It is already pretty cold for the middle of October, and soon it will be cold enough outside for Captain Cook and Greta. Yes, said Mrs. Popper, but if you keep them outside the house, they might run away. Mama, said Mr. Popper, you put your food back in the icebox tonight, and we will just keep Greta and Captain Cook in the house. Captain Cook can help me move the nest into the other room. Then I will open all the windows and leave them open. The penguins will be comfortable. They'll be comfortable, all right, said Mrs. Popper. But what about us? We can wear our winter overcoats and hats in the house. And Mr. Popper got up and opened all of the windows. It certainly is colder, said Mrs. Popper, sneezing. Achoo! The next few days were even colder, but the Poppers soon got used to sitting around in their overcoats. Greta and Captain Cook always occupied the chairs nearest the windows. One night, quite early in November, there was a blizzard, and when the Poppers got up in the morning, there were large snowdrifts all over the house. Mrs. Popper wanted to get her broom and have Mr. Popper bring his snow shovel to clear away the drifts, but the penguins were having so much fun in the snow that Mr. Popper insisted it should be left where it was. In fact, he even went so far to bring an old garden hose up from the basement and sprinkle all the floors that night until the water was an inch deep. By the next morning, all the Popper floors were covered with smooth ice, with snowdrifts around the edges near the open windows. Both Greta and Captain Cook were tremendously pleased with all that ice. They would go up on the snowdrift at one end of the living room, run down behind one another onto the ice until they were running too fast to keep their balance. They would flop on their stomachs and toboggan across the slippery ice. Whoosh! This amused Bill and Janie so much that they tried it too, on their stomachs of their overcoats. This, in turn, pleased the penguins greatly. Then Mr. Popper moved all the furniture in the living room to one side so that the penguins and the children would have plenty of room for real sledding. It was a little hard at first to move the furniture because the feet of the chairs had frozen into the ice. Towards the afternoon, the weather got warmer and warmer, and the ice began to melt. "Now, Papa," said Mrs. Popper, "you really must do something. We can't go on like this."
"But Captain Cook and Greta are both fat and sleek, and the children have never been so rosy."
"It may be very healthy," said Mrs. Popper as she mopped up the flood, "but it is very untidy."
"I will do something about it tomorrow," said Mr. Popper.